Hi dears, today we have a new lesson of how to write between lines. In English, we must start from up to down in writing and from left to right, as you see here. Okay. As you see here, we have three lines. Line 1, the red one, line 2, black one, and line 3. So we have here three lines, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Letter A, how to write letter A? We start all capital letters from line number 1, the red one. Fall in line to line number 3, as you see here, and another line number 1 to line number 3 again, like that. Okay, and the sleeping line on line number 2, as you see here, sleeping line here. Okay, again line number 1, falling line to line number 3, line number 2, falling line from line number 1, you see, to line number 3, as you see here, and a sleeping line on line number 2. Okay, so it's not acceptable to write it in the middle like that. It's nice, good, but it is not acceptable. It's flying like that, not touch like that, the sleeping line not here, all that is not acceptable. Okay, how to write the small one? Small one is between two lines, line number 1, now 2, line 3, as you see here. Line 2, line 3. We have half circle like that, and close it with a falling line and sleeping on line number 3. Again, half circle between line number 2 and line number 3, and close it with a falling line, as you see here, from line 2 to line 3. So it's not acceptable to write it between here. No, not acceptable. Big here, not acceptable, like that. Okay, now let's go to the second line here to here to write B. How to write B? We have here three lines, line 1, line 2, line 3. B, a falling line from line number 1 to line number 3, and half circle from line number 1 to line number 2, and another half circle from line 2 to line 3. Again, from line number 1 to line number 3, and the falling line here, you see, from 1, 2, 3, and half circle from line number 1 to line number 2, and another one from line number 2 to line number 3, as you see here. Okay, so it's not acceptable to write it between here. Oh, flying like that, not acceptable. Here like that, not acceptable. Up like that, not acceptable. Must be like that. Must touch here, must touch here, must meet here on line number 2. How to write the small one? Falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. and a half circle from line number 2 to line number 3. Again, falling line from line number 1, okay, to line number 3, and a half circle from line number 2 to line number 3, as you see here. Okay, another one, falling line from line number 1 to line number 3, and a half circle from line number 2 to line number 3. Here 2 and this is 3. So it's not acceptable to write it here between here like that, not acceptable, like that, not acceptable, not acceptable, like that, not acceptable. Must be between these 3 lines. Now we go next letter C. As usual, we work from the first line at the red one. Line 1, line 2, line 3. 1, 2, 3. C is a big half circle. Starts from line number 1 and goes to sleep on line number 3. Again, a big half circle, start from line number 1 and sleep on line number 3. It's not acceptable to write it the capital like that or like that. Not acceptable, not acceptable. Capital is like that, from here to here. Must touch here, must touch this. Line 1 and line 3. How to write the small one? The small one, very simple, between line 2 and line 3. Line 2, line 3. Line 2, line 3. So it's not acceptable to write it between here like that. Not acceptable, not acceptable, like that, not acceptable. A small one like that, not acceptable. Must be between line 2 and line 3. Okay. D. How about D? 3 lines as usual. Line 1, line 2, line 3. We always start from the red one. We cannot start from the black or this one. No, it's impossible. D, falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. And a half circle from line 1 to line 3. Again, falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. And a half circle from line number 1 to line number 3. So it's not acceptable to write it between here. No, not acceptable. Write it down here. Not acceptable. Up, down here. Not acceptable. All that not acceptable. Must be like that. Okay. Small one. Half circle between 2 lines. Which lines? Yes, very good. Line number 2, line number 3. The small one. And the falling line from line number 1 to line number 3 to close it. As you see again, half circle between line 2 and line 3. And the falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. So it's not acceptable to write it between here like that. Not acceptable. Up here like that. Not acceptable. Down here like that. Not acceptable. make here like that, here touch down here, no, inside here, no, make like that, not acceptable, here up here, not acceptable, okay, down here, not acceptable, no, must be like that. Now we go to the next letter, letter E. As usual, we start from line 1, 2, 3, line 2 and 3, line 1, line 2, line 3. Okay. Now E, how to write E? We start from line number 1 to line number 3. Okay, and a sleeping line on line number 1, and a sleeping line on line number 2, a sleeping line on line number 3. Again, a falling line from line number 1 to line number 3, and a sleeping line from line number 1, sleeping line on line number 2, a sleeping line on line number 3. So it's not acceptable to write it here like that or like that. It's good, but not between here on the lines are not the same here on the lines here. So it's not acceptable. Not acceptable. Must be like that. How about small e? Small e is between two lines, line 2 and line 3. Line 2 and line 3. We do here, as you see here, we draw half circle between line 2 and line 3, and we close it like that. Again, half circle between line 2 and line 3, and we close it like that. Very simple. So it's not acceptable to write it here like that, or like that, or like that, or these are not acceptable, not acceptable, or that not acceptable. Okay. Now we go to the second or letter or next letter is F, line 1, line 2, line 3. F's falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. Then we have a sleeping line on line number 1, F, and another one, line number 2. So F. Again, a falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. Then sleeping line on line number 1. I see on line number 1, and another one on line number 2. So not acceptable to make it like that or like that. No, must be like that. Not acceptable, not acceptable. Small f, it's here the same like a stick of your granddad, from starting from line 1 and going to line 3. And a sleeping line on line number 2. You see here, line number 2. Again, falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. And the sleeping line on line number 2. So not acceptable to write it like that, or like that, or like that, or like that. All these are not acceptable. Then we have G. How to write G? The same. Start line 1, line 2, line 3. 1, 2, 3. G looks like C, a big circle, starts from line number 1, goes to line number 3, like that. And a sleeping line, small one, on line number 2, as you see here. Then falling on line number 3 to meet this here. Again, big circle from line number 1 and sleeping on line number 3. And a sleeping line on line number 2 and a falling line on line number 3. This is G. Okay. One more G again. Half circle starting from line number 1 going to line number 3 and sleeping line on line number 2. Then we go you see, then we go half here on line number 2, then falling line on line number 3 to close the half circle like that, or to meet the half circle, as you see. So it's not acceptable to write it like that. Not acceptable. Okay, like that. Not acceptable like that. Not acceptable. Okay, it must be like that. Small g, half circle between line 2 and line 3. All small letters work on line 2 and line 3, or between line 2 and line 3. Then a falling line going from line 2, you see, and close here, cross line number 3 and go down here like that, and sleeping here. Again, half circle between line 2 and line 3, and the falling line from line 2 crossing line 3 and like that. So no one do it like that. Not acceptable like that. Not acceptable like that. Not acceptable must be here like that, as I did mention here. H, how to write H? Line 1, line 2, line 3. 1, 2, 3. Falling line from number 1 to line number 3, and the full line from number 1 to number 3, as you see here, and sleeping line on line number 2. Again, falling line from number 1 to number 3, falling line from number 1 to number 3, and a sleeping line on line number 2. Okay, not acceptable to make it like that or like that. Not acceptable. This not acceptable. Okay, small one from line number 1 and go into line number 3. Okay, so have a falling line from line number 1 to line number 3, and the sleeping line on line number 2. See, and the falling on line number 3. Looks like a chair, as you see here. So again, a falling line from line number 1 to line number 3, and a sleeping line on line number 2, then a falling line to line number 3. So not acceptable to make it like that or like that or like that. Not acceptable. How about I? Now the same, line number 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, I, very simple, we start here a falling line from line number 1 to line number 3, and a sleeping line on line number 1 and another one on line number 3, as you see here. Again, a falling line from line number 1 to line number 3, and a sleeping small line on line number 1 and a sleeping small line on line number 3. Not acceptable to make it like that or like that. Not acceptable. Not acceptable. How about the small one? The small one is between two lines, line number 2 and line number 3. Falling line, as you see, and we have a dot inside here, two lines. Again, a falling line from line number 2 to line number 3, and a dot in the middle here. Not acceptable to make it like that or like that or like that or like that or like that. Not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. All that not acceptable. Okay. Now we get letter J. Letter J. As mentioned before, we have 3 lines. Line 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. We always start with the red one here, the red one. Okay, J. How to write J? Firstly, we have a falling line from line number 1 to line number 3, like that. Then go to sleeping line like that. Okay, and sleeping line on line number 1. Again, J, a falling line from number 1 to number 3, then sleeping line on line number 3, going up again like that, and a sleeping line on line number 1. Okay, so not acceptable to write it in between like that, up like that, like that. Not acceptable, not acceptable. Okay, small one, all small, as we mentioned before, majority you can say, starting from line 2, as you see here, to line number 3, no, going down like that. Okay, and a dot between here. Again, falling line from line number 2, you see, from number 2, going to line 3, crossing line 3 and going down like that. Okay, and a dot here inside. This is a small one, so I cannot make it like that or like that. Not acceptable, not acceptable. How about K? Line 1, line 2, line 3, as usual. Starting falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. And on line number 2, we have a dot. Here, as you see, and you see, and a line up here and a line like that here. Okay, again, falling line from line number 1 to line number 3, and a dot on line number 2, and a line from line number 2 to go to line number 1, and a line from line number 2 to go to line number 3. Okay, so it's not acceptable to make it like that or like that or like that. not acceptable. How about the small one? A fallen line from line number 1 going to line number 3. And in the middle of line here between line 2 and line 3, in the middle, you see, we put a dot and we get a line up and a line down. Again, falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. Then we have a dot in the middle and a line up to line number 2 and a line up to line number 3. This is it. No one make it like that, small like that here, or like that here, or like that here, or like that here. All these are not acceptable. Now we go to L. 1, 2, 3. Start from line number 1 to line number 3, and a sleeping line on line number 3. Again, falling line from number 1 to number 3, and sleeping on line number 3, as you see. Okay, not here like that, not here like that. No, it must be the same like that. Small between line 2 and line 3, falling line, that's all. Small like that, that's all. Here, I'm sorry, it's L, L like that, I'm sorry, I forgot, I thought it's I, I'm sorry. So L from line number 1 to line number 3, that's it. So L from number 1 to line number 3. I'm sorry, got confused between L and I. I'm sorry, I thought that I'm writing I. Okay, how about L, sorry, starting from line number 1 to line number 3. That's all. Okay, so no one write it inside like that, or like that, or like that. Not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. As you see here, from line number 1 to line number 3. Number 1 to number 3. Number 3. Now we go to M. How to write M? 1, 2, 3. The same 3 lines. First line, number 1 to number 3. Then we have falling line from number 1 to number 2, and make zigzag now. You see, from here we have a dot, and go up and down. Again, from number 1 to number 3, and a falling line from number 1 to number 3. It shows number 2, and from number 2 up, down. Okay, it's clear. How about small one? Small, but here like that. No one make it like that. No one make it like that. All these are not acceptable. As you see here, flying like that, not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. Small one between 2 and 3, another 2 and 3, another 2 and 3. Again, 1 between 2 and 3, another 1 between 2 and 3, another 1 between 2 and 3. That's it. No one make it inside here like that. No one make it here like that, or like that. Not all that, not acceptable. Here, okay, we go now to N. How to write N? 1, 2, 3. falling line from number 1 to number 3, and the falling line from number 1 to number 3, and up again to number 1. Okay, again, falling line from number 1 to number 3, and a falling line from number 1 to number 3, up again to number 3. This is it. So no one make it like that inside, like that inside, or like that. Not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. Small one, the same like here, but they have only 2. 1, see, 2. That's it. Again, 1, 2. That's it. No one make it here like that, or like that, like that. Not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. Now we go to line here, letter here O. We start as usual from 1, number 2, number 3. Letter O, big circle starting from line 1 and going to line 3 and up again like that. Just big circle from number 1 going to number 3 like that. This is it. Okay, this is O. I cannot make it like that, like that. These are not acceptable. Small one between 2 and 3 as usual, all small like that. Okay, all small like that, the same between 2 and 3. Small circle between 2 and 3. Oh, this is O. No one make it inside here like that or like that or like that. These are not acceptable. Now going to P. 1, 2, 3. Starting from line 1, the red one as usual. Falling line from number 1 to number 3. And a half circle from number 1 to number 3. Again, falling line from number 1 to number 3, and have a circle from number 1 to number 2. I'm sorry. P, very simple, very simple. From number 1 to number 3, and have circle from number 1 to number 2. Falling line from number 1 to number 3, and have circle from number 1 to number 2. No one make it here inside like that or like that or like that. These are not acceptable. Small p, as we mentioned, we all start all small between line 2 and line 3. Here we start a line from line number 2, going to line number 3, crossing number 3 and going down like that. And a half circle from number 2 to number 3. Again, falling line from number 2 to number 3 and going down. And close it with a half a circle from number 2 to number 3 like that. No one make it like that, like that, like that. All these are not acceptable. How about Q? As usual, 1, 2, 3. Q, big circle like O, from line number 1 going to number 3 and close like that. And we have just a line getting from it like that. This is Q. Again, Q, a big circle going from line number 1, going number 2, and stepping on line number 3, and go up again to line here. Close the circle. And we have a line going from it down like that. No one make it like that, or like that. All these not acceptable. Small q, half circle between line 2 and line 3, as you see, and the following line from line number 1 in line number 2, crossing line 3 and go down like that. Again, half circle from line number 2 to line number 3, and the following line from line number 2 and crossing line number 3 and go down like that. Okay, no one make it like that, like that, like that. All these are not acceptable. Now we go to R. Letter R. Okay. 1, 2, 3. As usual, we have the 3 lines starting from the red one, as you see. R, a following line from line number 1 to line number 3. Then half a circle from line number 1 to line number 2. And the following to here line from line number 2 to line number 3. Again, a following line from number 1 to number 3. Half circle from number 1 to number 2. A following line from number 2 to line number 3. Okay. How about here? This not acceptable. Mr. Hamd, like that. Not acceptable. Not acceptable. All these are not acceptable. A small one, very simple. As usual, we work from line number 1, the 2, and the 3. Here, for a line from line number 2 to line number 3. Then a sleeping line on line number 2. Again, for a line from number 1, number 2 to number 3. And a sleeping line, but we get from here, you see, there's a small dot here, and sleeping like that. Again, a full line between 2 and 3. And before here, the end have here in a dot, you see, and get here a line like that, you see. Try to make it like that. This is much better. Again, do it again, this one like that. Follow a line from line 2 to line number 3, as you see here. Okay, then here a dot, then a sleeping line like that. Last time. Okay, a dot before the end here, and like that. This is R, small r. No one make it like that, inside, like that, inside, like that, inside. No, no, no. Follow this and follow this. This much better, much better. S, I always say S is like a snake. Here, 1, 2, and 3. Line 1, line 2, line 3. S, starting from line number 1, going to line number 3, and up again. You see? It's like a snake here. One, going to line number 2, sleeping on line number 3, and up again. No one make it like that inside, not acceptable, like that, no, like that, no, not acceptable, not acceptable. The small one is between 2 and 3, as usual. Small snake between 2 and 3, as usual. No one make it like that inside, not up here, not here, not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. Okay. Now we go to letter T. As usual, we start from line 1, line 2, line 3. 1, 2, 3. T, falling line from number 1 to line number 3. And a sleeping line on line number 1. Okay, we can just change the color. Okay, a falling line from line number 1 to line number 3. And a sleeping line on line number 1. Very simple. No one make it here like that, like that, like that. This, or make it like that, not acceptable. All these are not acceptable. Okay. No one make it like that inside here, not acceptable as usual. Small t, a falling line from line number 1 and sleeping on line number 3, and a sleeping line on line number 2. Again, a fallen line from line number 1 to number 3 and sleeping on line number 3, and a sleeping line on line number 2, as you see here. Okay, no one make it like that or like that or like that. All these are not acceptable. Now we go letter U. Letter U, as you see, 1, 2, 3. Letter U is like a pot. Starting from line number 1, going to line number 2, sleeping on line number 3, as you see here, and go up again to line number 1. Like a pot. You put food in a pot. This is a pot. You see, again, number 1, going to number 2, sleeping on line number 3, and go up again to line number 1. No one make it like that, up like that or like that, not acceptable. Out here, not acceptable. Like flying here, inside here, all these are not acceptable. How about the small one? The small one is between 2 and 3, and the sleeping line on line number 3. Again, 2 and 3, falling line from 2, go to number 3, and up again to line number 2, and the sleeping line on line number 3. Inside here, not acceptable, not acceptable, acceptable. All these are not acceptable. This acceptable, acceptable, but this is not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. Again, go to V, yes. V, starting from line number 1 to line number 3, and go up again to line number 3. Again, very simple. V, from number 1 to line number 3, Go up again to line number 3. Inside here, not acceptable. Like that, out here, not acceptable. Down here, not acceptable. Small v, the same between 2 and 3, falling line from number 2 to line number 3 and up again. Again, number 2, number 3, and go up again. These are acceptable, but not acceptable to make it inside small like that, or go up like that, or down like that. These are not acceptable. Okay. After that, we have letter U, W. Excellent. W, 1, 2, 3. Fall in line from number 1 to line number 3. Now we have the zigzag. Okay, what's the zigzag? Zigzag to go from here, up here, down here, up here. See, nice. Again, a fallen line from number 1 to number 3. Again, up again to line number 1. Down again, number 3, up again, number 1. As you play a game. Very simple and nice. Okay, this is okay, good, but no one make it like that, inside or out, like that or like that. All these are not acceptable. Small one here, number 1, so number 2 to number 3, up again, number 2, down again, up again. Very simple, nice. Again, zigzag, W, number 1 to number 2, and the zigzag, up, down, up. Again, nice game. Okay, but no one make it inside here, no. Out here, no. Down here, no, no, no. Okay. After W, we have letter X. Starting again, line number 1, 2, 3. X. A fall in line from line number 1 to line number 3. And we have here a dot. You see? And go from number 1 to line number 3, but we cross this dot. Again, number 1 to number 3. Okay, we have inside here a dot. We get cross here, line number 1, and cross this dot and go down like that. Okay, no one make it inside like that, or out like that, or down like that. All these are not acceptable. Small x, very simple, between 2 and 3, falling line from number 2 to number 3, and 1, 2 to number 3, as usual, 2 and 3. Very simple, you see. Okay, no one make it like that, not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. Okay, after that we have letter Y. We get Y. How could I write Y? Y, a falling line from line number 1 to line number 2. Then falling line from number 1 to line number 3. Again, a falling line from number 1 to number 2. And a falling line from number 1 to line number 3, like that. No one make it like that, or like that, or like that, or like that. All these not acceptable. Not acceptable. How about small one? Small between 2 and 3. It is like a U. You remember U? Falling line between 2 and 3 and go up again. See? And falling line to complete to go down like that. This is why. Again, 2 and 3 up again to line 2 and go down line number 3. This is a small U or small y. Small y. This is not acceptable. Not acceptable. Here, no, not acceptable. Like that. All these are not acceptable. Last letter Z. 1, 2, 3. Z. Sleeping line on line number 1 and falling line on line number 3. Sleeping line on line number 3. It's simple. Sleeping line on line number 1, falling to line number 3, sleeping on line number 3. This is capital Z. Capital Z here like that, here not acceptable, not acceptable, not acceptable. All these are not acceptable. Small one, very simple. Inside here, on line here 2, go line 3, down here like that. Again, line 2, line 3, like that. Very simple. Okay, inside the line here, not acceptable. Up here, not acceptable. Up here, not acceptable. Okay. Thank you.